Welcome to Harlem Renaissance. Today we will be focusing on 5 major artists. Number 1, Duke Ellington. Number 2, Bessie Smith. Number 3, Billie Holiday. Number 4, Jelly Roll Morton. And last but not least, Louie Armstrong. All 5 artists pursued the same means, which was embracing Black heritage and culture within the American life through books, music, and writing. Duke Ellington was born April 29, 1899 in Washington, D.C., a major figure in the history of jazz music. His career spanned more than half a century, during which time he composed thousands of songs for the stage, screen, and contemporary soundbook. Ellington performed in Broadway nightclubs as the band leader of a sextet, a group which in time grew to a 10-piece ensemble. He sought out musicians with unique playing styles, such as Bubba Miley, who used a plunger to make the wah-wah sound, and Joe Nansen, who gave the world his trombone growl. Ellington's fame rose to the rafters in the 1940s, which he composed several masterworks, including Concerto for Cootie, Cottontail, and Coco. At the age of 19, Ellington married Edna Thompson, who had been his girlfriend since high school, and soon after their marriage, she gave birth to their only child, Mercer Kennedy Ellington. On May 24, 1974, at the age of 75, Duke Ellington died of lung cancer and pneumonia. His last words were, "Music is how I live, why I live, and how I will be remembered." Bessie Smith was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee on April 15, 1894. She began to sing at a young age and in 1923 signed a contract with Columbia Records. Soon she was among the highest paid Black performers of her time with hits like Downhearted Blues, Backwater Blues, and Nobody Knows When You're Down and Out. Smith also collaborated with legendary jazz artist Louie Armstrong on several tunes, including Cold Hand Blues and I Ain't Gonna Play No Second Fiddle and St. Louis Blues. However, at the height of her success, Bessie Smith's career began to flounder due in part for financial ravages of the Great Depression and change in cultural mores. In 1929, she and Jack G permanently separated, and by the end of 1931, she had stopped working with Columbia altogether. Since her death, Bessie's music continues to win over new fans, and collections of her songs have continued to sell extremely well over the years. Born in 1915 in Philadelphia, Billie Holiday was one of the most influential jazz singers of all time. Her mother, Sadie, was an only teenager when she had her. Her father is widely believed to be Clarence Holiday, who eventually became a successful jazz musician, playing with the likes of Fletcher Henderson. At the age of 18, Holiday was discovered by producer John Hammond while she was performing in a Harlem jazz club. Hammond was instrumental in getting Holiday recording work with an upcoming clarinetist and bandleader, Benny Goodman. Holiday had a hit with God Bless the Child. She later on signed with Decca Records in 1944 and scored an R&B hit next year with Loverman. Her boyfriend at the time was trumpeter Joe Guy, and with him she started using heroin. After the death of her mother in October 1945, Holiday began drinking more heavily and escalated her drug use. Unfortunately, Holiday's drug use caused her great professional setback that same year. She was arrested and convicted for narcotics possession in 1947. Sentenced to 1 year and a day of jail time, Holiday went to Federal Rehabilitation Facility in Alderson, West Virginia. While her hard living was taking a toll on her voice, Holiday continued to tour and record in the 1950s. She began recording for Norman Granz, the owner of several jazz labels. 2 years later, Holiday had a hugely successful tour of Europe. Holiday gave her final performance in New York City on May 25, 1959. Not long after this event, Holiday was admitted to the hospital for heart and liver problems. She was so addicted to heroin that she was even arrested for possession while in the hospital. On July 17, 1959, Holiday died from alcohol and drug-related complications. Jelly Roll Morton was born in October of 1890 in New Orleans, Louisiana. In the early part of his life, he learned how to play the piano in New Orleans bordellos when he was just 10 years old. It was also by playing in these bordellos that he earned his nickname, Jelly Roll. When he was still a teenager, He started touring vaudeville shows, and he ended up in Los Angeles, California, where he lived for 5 years before moving back to Chicago. It was there when he started producing records for the Janet label. Beginning in 1926, he led Jelly Roll Morton's Red Hot Peppers, a group that was very familiar with the New Orleans style of jazz that Morton often boasted and credited himself for creating. The Red Hot Peppers earned their fame with hits such as Black Button Stomp and Smokehouse Blues, their sound and style laying the foundation for the swing movement that would become popular later. Morton moved to New York in 1928, where he recorded tracks such as Kansas City Stomp and Tank Town Bump. Although he made some changes to his style, such as allowing for more room for improv, it wasn't enough to keep up, and he unfortunately fell out of style and became seen as old-fashioned. Like many others, he struggled to make a living during the Great Depression. Morton was managing a jazz club in Washington, D.C. in the late 1930s when he met folklorist Alan Lomax. Beginning in 1938, Lomax recorded a series of interviews for the Liberty of Congress. These interviews included Morton's own accounts for the origins of jazz and some demonstrations as well. This helped reignite public interest in Morton's music. However, Morton was already poor in health, so he was never able to pull off a real comeback. Louie Armstrong is arguably one of the most recognizable names in jazz. He was born on August 4, 1901 in New Orleans. Armstrong had it rough. His dad left his family soon after Louie was born, and his mother turned to prostitution. He even had to leave school in 5th grade to start working. On New Year's Eve in 1912, Armstrong fired his stepfather's gun in the air and he was arrested on the spot. He was then sent to the Colored Waifs Home for Boys. There, he received musical instruction on the cornets, and he really fell in love with music. In 1914, the home released him, and he immediately began dreaming of life-making music. One of the greatest cornet players in town, Joe King Oliver, began acting as a mentor to the young Armstrong, showing him pointers on the horn and occasionally using him as a sub. In 1918, he married Daisy Parker. Although there was trouble in Paradise as there were many arguments and acts of violence between the two, and it was only the first of what would be Armstrong's 4 marriages, Armstrong's reputation as a musician continued to grow. In 1918, he replaced Oliver in Kid Ory's band, the most popular band in New Orleans at the time. Beginning in 1919, Armstrong spent his summers playing on riverboats with a band led by Fate Marabelle. It was on the riverboat that Armstrong honed his music reading skills. In 1922, he moved to Chicago to play the second cornet in King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band. He recorded his first solos as a member of the band in such pieces as Chimes Blues and Tears. Over the next couple years, he moved back and forth from Chicago to New York and back again. It was in New York where he created his most important early works, the Armstrong Hot 5 and Hot 7 recordings of 1925 and 1928. This cemented his spot as the first great jazz soloist. He also abandoned the cornet and began playing the trumpet. Heart and kidney problems forced him to stop performing in 1969. That same year, his longtime manager, Joe Glasser, passed away. He went on one last tour in 1970, and he passed away in his sleep in his home in Queens, New York, in the July of 1971.